Mabon, like a whole year, has gone by since we started this thing. And Mabon, it celebrates the second harvest. So I thought tonight, rather than telling a story, I would take the opportunity to kind of celebrate and take stock of where we've been over this last year together, and what a crazy year it's been. So of course you've heard stories from me, from Maria Gillan, and from Shona Cowie in Scotland, but you've also heard stories from Michael Harvey and Peter Stevenson from Wales as our guests, from Daniel Allison in Scotland, from Nuala Hayes in Ireland, as well as many other brilliant musicians who've either played live or via recordings. We've been blessed with stories, puppets, poems, music, song from our beautiful communities from all of these different homelands. Over the last year, we've enjoyed the wisdom of the Celtic calendar, and I feel like we've needed it more than ever. It's a kind of ancient wisdom that grounds us, and it gives us a stopping post through the year. It marks the year, and it kind of shows us the way, and it's brought us an amazing amount of wisdom that we've needed, I think, through these COVID times. Yeah, so I felt grounded, and I felt connected, and I felt connected with you, but I've also felt really connected with the changing of the seasons. And yeah, it's just helped build webs across our Celtic borders and across the world in this time of isolation. I, for one, have found amazing friends, and I hope these friendships will be ones that continue for many turns of the Celtic wheel. These events started with a spark that lit our candles for Samhain. In the flickering candlelight, we got carried away to lonely, dark Welsh hillsides, filled with spirits of the lost, of the Hwch the Gutta, of Lady Wen. We met people who belonged on their own Celtic land as much as the stones that made the land itself. We learned from Shona of how the stones beneath our feet held the story of the whole world within them. We discovered how the stones held spirits that would only be released when we noticed the stone and picked it up and put it in our pocket, which is why so often we feel like picking up stones and putting them in our pockets for no reason. It's so that we can release that spirit into the air. We learned of stones with holes in, that if you peeped through, you could see into different lands, into different realms, into different worlds. Like sparks from a fire, we leapt from Wales to Scotland, to Ireland, as the red thread of story wove itself between us and connected us. We travelled down the misty streets of Cork, across desolate commons that stretched out across Wales and up to the Cairn Gorms, where we met the great goddess, the Cailleach herself. Her hair was the clouds, her skirts were the cliffs, and in her hand she carried a great hammer that carved out the mountains and the streams and the springs that sang out her stories. I feel like I know her now. We are a little late with this event for Mabon, and we can definitely feel that the wheel has tipped. We can feel the Cailleach's breath on our necks. Samhain carried us to winter solstice, where we brought light into our homes and held things close to us that brought us warmth and hope. We filled our favourite cups. We opened our windows and changed the air for a moment as we laid a place at our virtual tables for one another in the way that old Welsh cottagers did years ago. Friends old and new, as we once again found closeness in that void. Maria reassured us that the wheels would turn again, that light would come. Of course, she was right. Before we knew it, Bridget, who was born with the sunrise and who had sunbeams emanating from her skin, had arrived, bringing us nourishment and hope as the spring began to rub its sleepy eyes. And so the year skipped on. The death of winter brought new life as we explored the life cycle for spring equinox. We heard of powerful women made of flowers, of selkies that stole back their skins and reclaimed their power, of kindness coming across the oceans in times of need and hunger. By the time May Day came, the world had begun to wake from its COVID slumber. The grindstone had started to turn, but still we found time to pause and gather in. We travelled across the River Lea of Ireland as gifts were given to the bees, and the bees gave their protection. We sat by the edges of lakes in Wales and Scotland, imagining the Cailleach's hammer being stolen by the Norse gods. When Lunasa came, the sure-footed deer carried us into the mountains, through the mists and the moonlight, where our heroine was taught the wisdom of the Cailleach and the Bodach, of roots and flowers and stews, of the sculpting of dreams. And here we are now, for Mabon. Mabon and autumn is one of my favourite times of year. It's a time to take stock, and I'm ready to do that. Ready to celebrate the harvest, ready to hear stories that will now carry us through to the Celtic New Year once again. Tonight, we have a guest storyteller called Lisa Schneidau. Lisa, I'm just really, really excited to have Lisa with us. Lisa is an environmentalist and a storyteller. She's been working in both of those realms for 25 years. She's worked for many wildlife trusts. She's worked with landowners and in education, and she does lots of incredible work with story and environmentalism that really helps to forge connections between the world we live in through the stories we tell and through the stories we hear. I feel like it's such important work, especially as we're entering this awful environmental crisis. Yeah, so it's just a huge pleasure and an honour to have Lisa. She's got a new book that's just about to come out, which explores the stories of folk stories of our rivers. She's got one on forests, and she's got another one on botany, which hopefully Asta will put in the chat at some point. But yeah, it's a huge pleasure to have you, Lisa. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Karma. That's very kind of you. And that was the most amazing lyrical recap of the Celtic year. That was very beautiful. Thank you. I wish I'd been at all of them. I'll have to sit back and watch some of the previous meetings and gatherings and stories. So hello to everyone, and blessings of the autumn equinox, blessings of Mabon. I'm talking to you from northeast Dartmoor, from a little town called Chagford, and there is still some heather up on the moor. The Dartmoor ponies are getting quite feisty, the foals are getting quite big now, there are still some rowan berries, there's still the odd autumn raspberry in the garden, but they won't last for long. The weather's really turned here, and quite a lot of the harvest that goes on around here is apples. There is a real apple thing going on in the southwest of England, as you may be familiar with. Apples everywhere, cider apples, eating apples, cooking apples, apples of all shapes and sizes. Apples that only occasionally grow where there's maybe a valley that's got a frost pocket in it, apples that go crazy on a tree that hasn't come alive for many years, all kinds of apple things. So I thought I would bring along an apple story, because this is a time of that harvest, but it is also a time where there is meant to be a balance of light and dark, and yet somehow it never quite feels like that. It feels peaceful, and yet to me this time definitely feels, or starts to feel, darker. This is a little story that I first heard a version of this from a storyteller in Dorset called Martin Maudsley, some of you might know. But since then I've found that there are many versions of this story from lots of different places, all with a similar theme to them. And the theme, frankly, is cider. I don't know how many of you like cider, how many of you have tried different kinds of cider, not necessarily that bright orange fizzy gunk that some people call cider, or the thing that people desecrate by putting ice in it. You just don't do that, do you? But that cider which is quite cloudy and tastes unwittingly like apple squash, that stuff that is really, really strong, that's the kind of cider I'm talking about, and that's the kind of cider this story is about. They say that in Somerset there used to be really, really good cider. Not just cider that tasted lovely, not just cider that gave you a little bit of a kick, a little bit of a sparkle. They say that in Somerset the cider used to be even better than that. They say that this particular cider Well, the more you drank, the better it got. It wasn't the kind of stuff that, will give you a terrible hangover in the morning. This cider, after a couple of glasses, every single story would turn into a sonnet. Every single chuckle would turn into deep, belly-aching, soul-shaking laughter. And the more you drank, the even better it got, until your feet lifted from the ground and you felt that you could fly. And there was never, ever a hangover in the morning with this cider. It was the perfect thing. It was a secret of the locals for a long time. And this cider came from a particular kind of cider apple tree. Now, cider apples are much smaller than normal apples. They're often bright rosy red. They're often like little bullets, but they're the ones that make the best cider. And this particular strain of apple trees, well, it started to die out. It used to be very well known and very widespread, but somehow, no matter how the insects would pollinate the flowers, no matter how the birds would try to spread the seed, these particular magic cider apple trees became fewer and fewer and fewer. It seemed the less people valued cider, the less they drank cider, the less they made cider, the fewer of these special trees existed. Until eventually there was only one magic cider apple tree left. It was tucked away in a little field on the Somerset Levels, in the middle of an orchard of other varieties and other kinds of apple trees, little orchard that was tucked away behind a ramshackle old barn with some old tractors in it somewhere on the Somerset Levels. Now, you would think it was just a normal tree, but the creatures knew better. The birds knew better, and they loved nothing more than to land on the branches of this tree. The bees loved nothing more than to go to the flowers of the sweet-smelling blossom of this tree. This was the tree to be at. Now, a farmer bought this land, a young farmer and his handsome wife, and they set up and they did up the little farmhouse, and they had big ambitions. They wanted to become new cider producers. They wanted to make a new business that would just be amazingly successful, would make everyone else around them happy. And as they worked it up, as they looked after that little orchard, as they tended to the trees and as they grazed the grass carefully with little sheep, all of the things there, collecting the apples, making the cider, getting the cider press to work, it seemed their business was doing very well, and people said that cider was uncommonly good, really good. People said that cider press even had a touch of the fairy to it. The farmer and his wife were well known for their parties, when the real special cider came out. The singing, the dancing was second to none. And the years went on. They were happy. They had 3 beautiful daughters. The daughters grew up. The daughters all left the land to go to the bright lights of the city. Well, the 2 eldest daughters did. The youngest, well, she went to Glastonbury, and I'm afraid to tell you she was pretty much lost to the world. But the farmer and his wife, they stayed on the Somerset Levels. They stayed looking after one another, looking after the farm and producing cider. Until one springtime, the farmer's wife fell ill. And not even special cider could save her. She died in the springtime, and that farmer, well, he walked down to that orchard with the blossoms scented and buzzing, and he sat down and he cried. That little orchard changed then. The farmer drew the curtains on the windows of that little farmhouse. Everything was kept in darkness. For what did he have to be happy about now? And everything on the farm was just left to go. And magic apple tree or not, the weeds started to take over that orchard then. The grass grew high, the bindweed grew higher and twisted its way around the trees, and still the birds of that place, well, they would still settle in that magic apple tree, above all others. The bees would still go to it. The fruit still came. The fruit fell to the ground. The fruit rotted. And so it went on for a number of years. The farmer was no longer interested in tending the land or looking after himself, let alone anyone else. The farmer started to go down to the local pub. And he fell in with a bad lot. He fell in with some of those really strange men you find hanging around pubs in Somerset. Ones that are into shooting and sport shooting for fun. He got himself a gun. He decided he was going to shoot his way to happiness. He was going to find things that he could shoot at and kill, for how could they be happy when he wasn't? But any of you who've ever tried shooting with a gun or with a bow and arrow will know that there's an awful lot more skill to it than meets the eye. And talking of meeting the eye, our farmer was drinking a lot. Not cider. He was drinking spirits. He was drinking the hard stuff. He was drinking the kind of stuff that after a while makes your eyes go wonky. Put that together with a gun, and you've got a little bit of trouble. Frankly, he was a rotten shot. He could not shoot anything he put his mind to, even when he focused or thought he did, even when he concentrated or thought he did. All of his mates, as soon as that gun came out, well, they went running. But he was determined. And he would go down to his land and he would look for things that he might be able to shoot, you know, slow-moving birds, bigger creatures that he might even be able to hit. And it was one afternoon in the autumn time that he went down to the orchard, fought his way through the weeds, cursed as he had to kick everything out of the way to open the gate, and he walked into that orchard just at the time when the robins were past their molting and just beginning to sing their song again, just beginning to set their territory. At the time when the blackbirds and the song thrushes and the mistle thrushes were just beginning their winter songs. The farmer walked through the orchard with his big gun, looking for things to shoot. And he noticed, somehow, all the birds seemed to be perching on one particular tree. They were all there and they were singing and they were happy, and he stood next to the apple tree and he said, "What have you got to be so happy about?" And he got his gun and he took aim, or he thought he did, and he shot. Of course he missed. Birds flew up into the air, and it wasn't long before they all settled down on the same tree. A great mob of jackdaws came over, landed on the same tree. Something strange about this tree. He took aim again. He was a rotten shot. He didn't hit a single bird. There was the odd feather flying, but they went up into the air and down again onto the same tree. And he started to get really, really annoyed now. "Why are you all on that tree? What have you got to be so happy about? Come on." But no matter how much he shot, he didn't hit a single thing, until he threw his gun down on the ground and he said, "I'll be back. I will be back for you tomorrow. I will get one of you." And he turned and he went up to the farmhouse, got his purse, and went down to the local newsagent. And there he bought a big pot of glue and a brush. And the following morning, first thing, he went down to that apple tree long before dawn, and he got the glue and he painted glue all the way along the top of every single branch he could reach of that little apple tree. He came back later on in the day. All the birds were sitting on the branches. They were all singing. The blackbird, the robin, the song thrush, the mistle thrush, the jackdaws in the top cackling to one another. They were all having a grand old time. They were all on that tree, and he got his gun again. Of course the birds flapped, and the birds flapped, and the birds flapped, but their feet were glued fast to the branch. And he carried on shooting. And he shot, and he shot, and he shot, and the birds flapped, and they flapped, and they flapped, but of course their feet weren't going anywhere, and he was missing every single time. And he was going wild now. He was shooting crazily across the whole orchard. You've never heard such a cacophony of sound. But the birds kept flapping as he kept shooting. And as their wings flapped and flapped, there was a groaning and a creaking noise. And then the farmer stopped shooting, because in front of him it seemed that the whole tree was moving. The whole thing was coming up with its roots coming out of the deep, rich peat soil of the Somerset levels. And the farmer watched as the tree rose up into the air, birds and glue and leaves and apples and roots and everything. And when the tree was well clear of the orchard, well clear of the canopy of the other trees, the tree, flapping wildly, started to head north. And the tree flew. The tree flew out over the levels, over the rivers Brew and Axe, right the way up nearly as far as Bristol. The tree flew right the way over the Severn Estuary, all the way until it hit the Forest of Dean. It was flying over Gloucestershire when the rain began. And the rain was the only thing that shifted that glue that was holding the feet of the birds. And as it rained, the birds shook their feet free of the tree, and they were up into the air, and they were away. And the tree fell and fell and fell, and the tree was lost. Now they do still say, especially round Shepton Mallet way, they do say that in Somerset they do make uncommonly good cider. But just as I did at the beginning of this session, they will warn you of it. They will warn you of drinking too much. Because you get sad if you drink too much of that kind of cider, and frankly you will get the devil's hangover to pay in the morning. But somewhere in the Forest of Dean, somewhere in the middle of the trees of a particular little woodland, there is one little tree growing. One little apple tree, unlike any of the others. One little apple tree that has something of the fairy magic around it. They say it's still there. Whether humans will find it again, well, that's quite another matter.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Lisa. Yay.
Gosh, I've not filled up for a long time.
Oh.
I like that.
It's so lovely to have an apple story in there, as the apples are just ripening and coming into harvest at the moment as well. Yeah, really wonderful. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.
You've made me decide that I might have to tell a little short story in the second half as well, which is so simple. I've got so many threads in that story, so
Good.
might have to do that. Work in progress, mind you. Brilliant. And now we're going to pass over to Shona, I think. Yes, we are. Over to Shona. Thank you, Lisa.
I managed to find a little bit of cider in my my cupboard, which I will enjoy now. Thanks so much, Lisa. What a pleasure. My boyfriend and John and I have been talking about the story that you told at one of the events at Beyond the Border ever since. We absolutely loved it. So we're really pleased that you'd be telling tonight. Brilliant. So tonight I'm going to share a story with you, which is it's a pretty serious story. It's about a woman who is she's a family woman. She's an independent woman. She's also an older woman, and not enough of our stories are about them. So she grew up on a small island, and when her parents died, she took over the house. In fact, they built this house together, And she had her family on this island, and they grew this house and they built annexes and rooms and rooftops and basements. They built this brilliant house on this little island. They had their own orchard from which they made their most delicious cider. They had fresh vegetables and plants growing. They had animals on this island. You may unmute yourselves. What animals did they have on the island?
Shetland ponies.
Oh, they had Shetland ponies. One was
wild pigs, I think.
Wild pigs. What should we call the wild pigs? Mabon. One can be called Mabon.
You've got to have a chicken.
Oh, definitely had to have a chicken. Mabon, a pig, a chicken called Cider, and a goat.
Go.
A goat! Goat! A goat! What was the goat called? Wonky-eyed whiskey. Whiskey wonky eyes. Yeah, in Scotland, we usually drink the alcohol and make sure eyes go wonky, TBH. So we had lots of animals. It was a very self-sufficient home life that they had. And she brought up her lovely children on this island. But when they grew older, of course, it was time for them to have their own lives. And so they left and they went to the mainland and they built their own homes and they had their own families. And so it came to a point when it was about this time of year, when the rains had set in. P.S. I have not left this cabin in about 2 weeks. It has been raining in Argyll non-stop. It came to a moment like this, off the west coast of Scotland, on an island, rainy, rainy, rainy. And she was alone. And her family would say to her, Granny, come to the mainland. You can't live on your own. Come to there's room in the toddler's bedroom. You can sleep in there with them. And her other child says, Granny, come with us. There's a cupboard. We can convert the cupboard. You can fit in. You're only small. And she says, my darlings, I love you. Thank you. But if you make me sleep with snotty toddlers, however brilliant they are and how much I love them, or if you squash me into your under the stairs cupboard, you can count yourself out of my will. No way. I love my island. This is my home. I built this with my own hands. I've got my own food. I've got my animals. I'm self-sustainable. This is paradise. This is what I've worked my whole life for. And she'd sit on her comfiest chair looking out of the window at the view across the water. And usually, well, it wasn't always rainy. Sometimes she could sit there and she'd see the sunset and she'd have her cider from her own trees, or she'd have her wonky-eyed whiskey, or she'd have her hot chocolate, and she'd think, yes, this is what I have worked my whole life for. I'm really happy. But one night, and it was on a night like this, and she was sitting hearing the rain pouring down on the rooftops with her cider, and she could hear by the howl of the wind and by the colour of the pre-evening sky that this storm was a big one, that she would be on this island and she couldn't get off it for 3 days, and nobody could get on it for 3 days. She was alone now, completely cut off. She checked her phone, no landline. She checked her mobile, no bars. Brilliant, she thought. Brilliant. I can read my books. I can do my sewing. This is it. And she went to her bed. And the next morning she was up. She was preparing the house for a huge storm to come. She battened down the windows. She shut them tight and boarded them up. She got enough food in the house for 3 days, 2.5 now, and she made sure that her chickens were inside. They could sleep in her sock drawer, that the pigs, what was the pig called? Mabon the pig, he came in too, and he could sit in the kitchen under the sink. And she was and the goat was there as well. He could be tied up just by the front door, and he was quite happy on a wee bit of hay that she brought in for him. And so finally, when this huge storm arrived, she was cozy, tucked up with her blankets on and her animals. Oh, stop eating that, Mabon! Put that down! Tucked up with her blankets and her cider. She was ready. And it was then that she heard a Granny! No one can get on this island for 2 more days. And no person can get off it, which means that's not a person knocking at her door. Granny, I'm hungry. And her mind was racing. She imagined some goat-headed, pig-faced beast with cider apple trees sprouting out her head. But did she cower? No, she did not. No, she did not. She's a granny. She went straight to the door and she opened it and she said, please, beast, come in. And into her house came a goat-horned, apple tree crested, pig-faced beast. I'm hungry, Granny. And Granny says, I have food. I always have food. I'm a granny. Help yourself. And she gave the beast a bowl of porridge, which it ate in one gulp, and then ate the bowl and the spoon. And then the beast turned around to the cupboards and opened them up. And he took out the packets of porridge and ate them in a one. And the cans of tomato puree, what are they called? Puree, plum tomatoes. 3 of them down in a oneer. And then picked out the noodles and the stock cubes and the cups and the saucers all going into his mouth, and then pulled off the cupboard itself right off the wall. I'm still hungry, Granny. And he saw Mabon in the corner. I can't remember if Mabon's the goat or the pig, but he had his eye on that goat. I'm starving, Granny. Stop, says Granny, please. This is my home. Please don't destroy it. That's my goat. These are my animals. Stop. Goat's fine, runs away. This is my home. Please don't destroy it. Can't we just sit down and have a chat? What's a chat? Says the beast. Well, a chat is when I ask you a question and then you answer, and then you ask me a question and I answer. We can do it by the fire. It's very cozy. Have a cider. And so they sit together and they drink a cider, and the monster says, ask me a question. Well, monster, what are you scared of? Well, Granny, I've never been asked something like that before. I tell you what I'm scared of. I'm scared of those wee blacky berries on the bushes right now. They terrify me. I hate them. What are they called? Blackberries. I hate them. If one touches my mouth, I'll go bleh. If one touches my skin, I have to scratch it off. Oh, they're terrible things. What are you scared of? Well, monster, says Granny, I'm scared of cake. Cake and biscuits. I'm terrified of cake and biscuits. And money. I'm scared of money. Right. Well, thanks for the chat. I better be going. And up stands the monster and off they go out of the house. And so the next morning, Granny sets to work. She leaves her house and she takes an axe and some tools, and she picks up every single blackberry bush that's on the island. She pulls them out from the roots and she stuffs them around her house. And she takes her blackberry jam that she's got hidden, not in that cupboard, another cupboard. It's her best blackberry jam, and she smears it over all the door frames, and she smears it on the windows, and she smears it over her face and on her hair and on her body. She leaves one spot of her house not covered in blackberries, just one spot where there's a ladder which climbs up onto the roof. And the time has come. The wind is still howling around her house. There's still a storm. So she sits there with her blanket on and she waits for this monster to arrive. And sure enough, just as evening has fallen, she hears him. Granny! You bitch! I thought we were friends! We had a chat! You gave me your cider, I liked it. And now you've gone and put the very thing I told you I was scared of all over your house. You're getting it. And the monster climbs up the ladder and onto the roof of the house and shouts down the chimney, "You deserve this, you old witch!" And like magic, down the chimney flies cakes. Loads of cakes. Fairy cakes and Victoria sponges and sticky toffee puddings all flying down the chimney, and then biscuits, bourbons and cookies and jammy dodgers, and Granny's picking them up and throwing them around. "Oh, please, monster, you're a terrible beast. Please, stop this." Making a little cup of tea. And, "Oh, what a terrible animal you are. Stop this. You're going to kill me with fear." I hope the monster doesn't remember the other thing I'm scared of. And down the chimney flies money, loads of money, notes and coins just bouncing off the hearth, and she's picking it up and gathering it and stuffing it in her bra and in her sock drawer. And Mabon the goat is chewing on a £100 note. "Stop that, Mabon, stop that!" There's money everywhere until she feels like she's probably got enough now, and she decides to feign a very dramatic heart attack. "Goodbye, cruel world monster, you've been too much for me." And she falls on the floor. And the monster waits to hear, "Take that, you witch," and she leaves. And so Granny, she has enough money to rebuild any damage to her house, to buy a boat, which is big enough to take her off the island or on the island whenever she wants, regardless of the weather. And she buys enough money to build herself a little house on the mainland, quite near her family. Not too near, but near enough that she's not going to feel too far away from them. And she had enough magic cakes and biscuits to keep her grandchildren happy for a good few years. And that's the end of that.
Good one. Kids have learned that, haven't they?
That's a silly one.
Hello. I wasn't sure if Maria was going to just pick straight up there, but thank you, Shona. That was great. We loved that. Yeah, we loved it. So much fun. Thank you.
So sorry, my microphone decided to go on strike. It was just enthralled by the story. That was lovely, Shona. Thank you so much. So this story comes from the wild, wide fields of Ireland, Éire as we call it, the green jewel that bobs in the blue Atlantic Ocean. It is said that the people of Éire are close to the land, that they know the secrets of the standing stones. You can even see it in their place names, for we have the island of Beara, dedicated to the Cailleach. We have her standing stone, where she decided to have her last step and to settle in Éire forever. We have Listowel, or Listowel as it is known, which is the field of the standing stones. So you would imagine that the people of Ireland, the people of Éire, know well the ways of nature. But in the past years, in the years that have just gone, in the generation that have just begun to leave this planet, we have forgotten those ways. Factories have begun to spring up in Ireland. We've had a thing called the Celtic Tiger, where the money came in and the sense ran out the door. And what does it cost us, you ask? Well, listen to this story. Stories are a living thing. And this story was gathered from Maclan Scaelta, my story family. We sat and reminisced on all that was good from past times and wondered how we could use it in this day and age. And this story was born between us. Once in a little town, a small little village like Listowel, a big factory was built. Men looked at the shears and the ploughs and they put them down and went to work in the factory. For a while, all was good. They played together, went to the pubs together, went to one another's families, 21sts, weddings, funerals, all of that. But over time, they became part of the machine. Their eyes began to be cast downwards. They were interested in things like deadlines and paperwork and meeting goals and SMART goals. And they forgot about the land and about the seasons because it was always the same inside the factory. It was smoky and smutty and hot and pressurized. And they clocked in and they clocked out. And they forgot to look up and they forgot to look into one another's eyes. All except Yeshi. Yeshi was the tea man. They said that he was different, maybe a few bob short of the pound, but everybody loved him all the same. He'd come in the morning singing songs and he'd put on all of the industrial kettles waiting for tea time. If it was extra hot, he'd find a window somewhere and he'd open it. And if you were under Yeshi's open window, you might see a spot of blue sky or a little bird fly by, or you might get a little bit of soft, cooling rain on your face as you slaved at your work. And then it would be 11 o'clock, and Yeshi would turn his radio right up. Yeshi loved the 80s music, and in particular, he loved the songs of Boy George. So you'd often hear those songs shining out, calling people to tea, and down they'd go. But one morning, Yeshi came out and his face was downcast and the radio was silent. "What's wrong, Yeshi?" the people asked. They wouldn't have asked anyone else, but it was so unusual for Yeshi not to be smiling. "My friend," he said, "my friend, I've just heard it on the death notices. Daisy is gone." And he went towards the canteen. Without a word, everybody stood up from their machines and followed him down to the canteen. They put out the chairs there in a big circle. They didn't even have to make a plan to do this or a SMART goal. It just happened. Somebody made Yeshi a cup of tea that day instead of him pouring tea from the big industrial teapots. "There you go, Yeshi," they said. "Tell us about Daisy." "Daisy had a cottage and I passed it every morning. She made the most beautiful cider from the apples, just like we've heard today. And she made the most beautiful smeared dova, the jam from the blackberries. Oh, I'm going to miss her. She loved to sing songs, the old songs," he said. "You know, songs like Trasna Danta Dalshir, Slow nation weakness is slow nation fear." Slow nation weakness, he said. "Goodbye to the loneliness. Sure, I'm bound to be lonely now." And they all threw their arms around him and said, "Yeshi, we'll mind you." And then his face began to light up. "We're all in a circle," he said. "We are, Yeshi," they said. And as always was the case, they were uncomprehending of what he was saying. "We're all in a circle," he said, "just like Daisy. And she held hands," he said. And he put out his hands and everybody caught a hand. And they all held hands. And they all, despite themselves, started to smile. They didn't need to understand why they were smiling. They just felt it lift their hearts and their spirits. And Yeshi said, "She's not gone. She was with the she. She was in the circle with the she folk." "What are you talking about, Yeshi?" "Sure, she is the Irish word for fairy," he said. "She was standing in her kitchen in a circle. This circle reminded me of it. I'm so glad for this tea circle," he said. And he got up And he left that room and he left the factory. And then something happened that had never happened in the 20 years since that factory opened. Everybody left the building. Nobody clocked out. They all walked down to Daisy's cottage with Yeshi. Yeshi opened the door, and with a big smile of welcome, he told them to come in. There was hardly room in Daisy's small kitchen for all of the people, but they made circles and circles within circles, and they held hands and they thought of Daisy. Nobody knows what happened to those people. They never worked another day in that factory. And now, if you go to Daisy's cottage and you stand at the door on a warm October day where the smells of lavender are in the air, in the distance, you might hear, "Come a, come a, come a, come a, come a, camellia, red, gold, and green, red, gold, and green."
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Maria. Wow, what a wonderful end to the first half. Brilliant. With my name in that song as well, you know, it's always a bonus. So we're going to have a little break now, and we're going to listen to some music from Toby Hay, who is a quite incredible guitarist from rural Mid Wales, and quite well known now, but he's very much inspired by Mid Wales landscapes and the music that he makes. And we're just going to play some music. He recorded it right at the beginning of lockdown, so it feels quite nice and cyclical, is that the right word, to be playing it now. He's also selling it on Bandcamp, and he's putting all proceeds from this month to Shelter Cymru, which, like, we're celebrating the change of the seasons, but I think there's lots of people up there who are really not having a very nice time as the season change. So if anybody likes it and wants to buy it, it would be nice to make that contribution. Shona is done a lot of work with the Simon community with homeless people in Scotland as well, so it felt like there was resonances there. Anyway, so yeah, we're going to listen to that now. If anybody else feels the urge to tell a story, or anything, it can, if you just want to talk a little bit about something, or have a reflection, or tell a story, sing a song, read a poem, that would be great. I will just work out a running order while we're having a little break, and I will pop that in the chat. Thank you. Have a break, 10 minutes. What would you like? Like a drink?
Investigate.
I'm feeling a bit lovely. Hello, welcome back to our second half. We've got some wonderful storytellers and some wonderful poems that people are going to share this evening, and I'm just really, really excited to hear what you've all brought to share with us all. We've had quite a few people come in, so I am going to actually not tell anything now. I know I said I would, but I can leave that for another night. So we're going to kick off with Liz Buyfield, who is a wonderful poet and has been sharing some of her poems in the last few events that we've had, and she's just put together a collection of her poems, which I'm sure she can drop into the chat the best way that we can. You might be able to buy that book of poems from her. Yeah, so over to you, Liz. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. Yes, so this is a poem for this time of year, and it's called Belief, but spelt B-E-L-E-A-F. So if you imagine, if it's not too far a stretch, that I'm a leaf, okay? I'm all alone now, I'm just hanging on. Was surrounded by friends, now they're all gone. Through the spring and the summer we hung out together. We frolicked and danced, whatever the weather. We gave homes to insects, we renewed the air, gave shade to the people from the sun's searing glare. As temperature dipped, my friends started to change. Their activity slowed. They developed quite strange fiery colours and looked to be wrinkled and dry. Why had they changed? No one knew why. As the colours grew stronger, their hold became weak, and one after another they fell into the creek and drifted away on the trickling brook. No farewells were offered, there were no backward looks. Now my colours are changing, I'm losing my grip. A free gust of wind sent me on my last trip. What will be my fate? Will I rejoin my friends? Disappear without trace? Is this how it all ends? But I'm strangely uplifted and carried away and placed on a table. I hear someone say, "That's a beautiful leaf. Why don't you paint it?" And that's what she did. I was recreated with paper and paint and her artistic skill. In her beautiful home, one more role I'll fulfill. In her garden she left me, with others like me, our hues blending together beneath an old tree. As our essences mingle and sink into the ground to replenish the soil, I know that I've found my several purposes here on the earth, to balance and nourish, to be part of rebirth, to bring beauty and pleasure and realize my worth. So that's belief. Thank you.
Liz, what wisdom that comes in that poem. Really, really great. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Really lovely. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm hoping that Andy might tell us a little story now. Are you expecting to, Andy?
Yeah, I'd love to tell you a story.
Brilliant, fabulous. Andy, I did my first storytelling course with at Bleddfa a few years ago, and he's a wonderful storyteller, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what he's going to tell. Thanks, Andy.
Thanks very much. So this is coming from a favourite source of stories. It's called Fairy Tales, and it's by Terry Jones. Now, if you're old like me, you'll know that he used to be in the comedy troupe called the Monty Python's Flying Circus. But in the late 70s, wrote a series of stories for his daughter when she was growing up. And she said, "Dad, why don't you put them in a book?" So we did. So this is the first one in the book. And also Terry Jones came from Colwyn Bay in Wales. So he also has got like a Celtic connection. So this story is called The Corn Dolly. So once there was a farmer in his fields. It was autumn time and he had his sharp scythe and he's cutting down all the corn. And as he was doing it, he heard a crying sound. This crying was coming from the field somewhere, couldn't work out where it was. But the more he cut the corn, the louder the crying became, until there was just one shuck of corn left to cut. And he looked down, and there in the corn was a little creature made of corn stalks, and it was sobbing its eyes out. Well, the farmer was a kindly chap, so he said, "Whatever's the matter?" And the little creature said, "You don't care." "What do you mean?" said the farmer. "I don't care." "Oh, you farmers, you don't care what happened to us corn dollies." Well, the farmer, he'd never seen a corn dolly before. So he said, Well, tell me what the problem is and I might be able to help you. Oh, us corn dollies. We live in the cornfields and we look after them and we don't do any harm to anybody. Then every autumn, all you farmers, you come along with your sharp scythes and you cut all the corn down. And then we have nowhere to live in the winter. We're homeless. Well, the farmer said, look, we have to cut the corn down so we can make bread, so we can have something to eat. And besides, if we didn't cut the corn down, it'd all wither away anyway, and you still have nowhere to live. And at that, little corn dolly started sobbing its eyes out again and said, you don't care, just because we're small and made of corn. You don't care what happens to us in the winter. You don't care if we're homeless. And the farmer reached down and picked up the little creature and said, no, come on, you can come home with me. And he took the creature home to his farmyard and went into the barn. He says, there you are. You can stay in the barn over winter when it's nice and warm and snug. The creature looked at the farmer and said, don't you and your wife live in a nice warm farmhouse with brick built? Just because I'm small and made of corn, you think you can just leave me here? Oh, not at all, said the farmer. Come with me. And he picked up the corn dolly, took it into the farmhouse and put it on the kitchen windowsill. Said, there you are. You can stay there. The little corn dolly looked at the farmer and says, oh, just because I'm small and made of straw, you think you can leave me here while your wife, you sit in the warm living room? Oh, not at all, said the farmer. And he picked up the corn dolly and took it into the living room and put it on a chair. But still, that corn dolly still wasn't happy. What's the matter now, said the farmer. Oh, just because I'm small and made of straw, you can think you can put me on a hard chair, while you and your wife, you sit on nice, warm, comfortable chairs. Oh, not at all, said the farmer. And he picked up the corn dolly and put it on a nice, soft chair. But still it wasn't happy. Now, what's the matter, said the farmer. Oh, you and your wife, you're sitting nice and close to the fire. Because I'm small and made of straw, you think you can just sit me here? Oh, not at all, said the farmer. You can sit wherever you like. And he picked up the corn dolly and put it right by the fire. And just at that point, a spark flew out of the fire, landed on the corn dolly, and because it was made of straw, it burst into flames. And because it was small, there's nothing that the farmer or his wife could do anything about it. And that was the end of the corn dolly. And that's the end of my story.
Oh, poor little corn dolly. I've got a Jack Russell that's a little bit like that corn dolly. But luckily not so flammable. Thank you, Andy. Thank you. That's great. And I think we're now over to Elaine.
Hello. Well, we're on the subject of leaves and trees and birds, and I've got a Jack story. Duncan Williamson. It's Jack and the Singing Leaves. Now, Jack in this story lives with his two brothers on a farm, and they're rough and tough farm boys, and you know well, my mother came from farming stock and her two brothers, and they drink anything's neck and eat it. So these boys were the same, you know. Animals were for eating. Crops were for eating along with the animals, you know, that was the story. But Jack, he was a dreamer. And his brothers thought he was bone idle because he just lay about under the trees dreaming. And if any wee animals got into trouble, Jack would rescue them and take them back to the house and put them in wee boxes and feed them and nurse them along. And his brother said, Jack, you're a soft laddie. You really are. You should just wring their necks and eat them or throw them away. You're wasting your time. No, 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 said Jack. So they despaired. We're away to work. Get some work done. But Jack was wandering about and he came upon a wee cuckoo. Just this wee cuckoo, and it had a broken wing. And Jack said, oh, wee cuckoo, and he scooped it up. And his brother says, what have you got now, Jack? Cuckoos. See, cuckoos, they'll just fly away. There's no point in wasting any time on it. It'll not be able to flee with its fellow cuckoos, so just wring its neck and put it out its misery. Oh no, said Jack. I'm going to take this wee cuckoo home. And he took it home, took it up to his room, put it in a wee box all covered out with soft straw, and he fed it and he gave it wee drinks and he stroked it, and oh, he was fair away with this wee cuckoo, and his brother thought, saft in the head, that lad, he never does a stroke of work, leaves us to do all the work. Oh, Jack. So Jack just looked after this cuckoo, even though he knew it would flee away, and it didn't matter. He would look after it and bring it back to health. And that's what he did. And as the cuckoo started to recover, Jack says, oh, you're a braw wee thing. You're a braw wee cuckoo. And the cuckoo turned round to him and he says, oh, thanks awfully much, Jack, for saving my life. You don't know what that means to me. And Jack looked all around and he thought, who's that speaking? And he said, who's that speaking? And the cuckoo said, it's me. I'm speaking. I'm a speaking cuckoo. And Jack said, a speaking cuckoo? Well, I've heard it all now. So how come is it that you can speak? And the cuckoo says, well, don't be silly. I'm enchanted. That's how I can speak. Daft laddie. I'm enchanted. And who did that happen, said Jack. Well, that'd be telling you. But I was enchanted and sent away with the cuckoos. Well, says Jack. So what will you do? And he says, well, once I get better, I'll have to flee away with the cuckoos. But I'll come back. I'll come back and visit you. And Jack says, oh, I don't believe that. Once you go away, that's it. Well, Jack and the cuckoo were inseparable until the cuckoo was strong enough. And he tapped on the windows when he saw the cuckoos flying away into warmer climes. And the cuckoo, Jack opened the window, out went the cuckoo and it flew away. Cheerio! I'll be back, said the cuckoo. Aye, right enough, said Jack. Jack's brother says, aye, tell you that cuckoo would fly away. Oh, but that just wasn't any ordinary cuckoo. That was a speaking cuckoo. Well, his brothers, they just thought he'd really gone really soft in the head now. And they said, come away with you, Jack. Get away and get some work done. There'll no be any money for you. You didn't get some work done. So the brothers went away and they got down to work. And once a year, the king and his wife invited all the townsfolk and the farmers and everybody for round about to come and give the princess a birthday present. So Jack's brothers got all toshed up. And they said, you'll not be able to come, Jack, because you've not got a bean to your name, because you'll no do a stroke of work. So you just bide here and watch the fair. Aye, says Jack. And he was quite miserable. And then he heard a wee tappet on the window. And there was a cuckoo. And the cuckoo said, Jack, I've got a wee present for you. You could give that to the princess. And Jack says, aye, what have you got? The cuckoo says, well, I went back to my own country and I got you some singing leaves. Jack says, well, I never. First a talking cuckoo, now singing leaves. I really thought I had heard everything. How come they sing? And the cuckoo said, if you sit them in the wind on their wee branches, the wind will go through them and they make beautiful music. That would be braw for a princess, wouldn't it? Aye, says Jack, you're right there. So Jack got himself up And by the time he got into the town, he was about last in the queue, and the princess was ready to take off in her lovely carriage. And she spotted Jack with these leaves in his hand, and she was very intrigued. And she said to the coachman, "Stop the coach, I want to see this man here." And she got down and she says, "What have you got there?" And he says, "Oh, them there, they're singing leaves." "Singing leaves," she said. "Well, now I've heard different, eh?" She says, "I've had many presents, but I've not had any singing leaves. Give them to me, and where did you say that you came from?" And Jack says, "The wee farm outside town," he says. "I never had anything else to give you because my brothers, they didn't give me any money because they say I'm lazy." "Oh, that's a shame," she said. "You leave this problem with me." She says, "If these leaves are any good at singing like you say they are, I'll see my father says you're all right." "All right," says Jack, and he went away home. Now the princess put the leaves in her window on the branches, and she kind of forgot all about them because she had loads and loads of gorgeous presents. And then the wind blew in and she heard the most beautiful music, and she turned round and she said, "Well, they really do sing, these leaves. Oh, that's lovely. I've never heard anything like that in all my life." Well, the music floated down the stairs to the king and queen. And the king says, "Where's that braw music coming from?" And up he goes to his daughter's room. And she tells him the story about the singing leaves. And he says, "Well, I wouldn't have believed that until I heard these leaves singing. Now, who gave them?" And she says, "Well," and she told the story about Jack. And Jack had told her about the speaking cuckoo. The king says, "A talking cuckoo?" He says, "I wouldn't have believed that if I hadn't heard these singing leaves." He says, "I want this Jack in." So he sends out his guards, and his guards go to the farm, and they rattle on the door. And the brother said, "Jack, what have you been up to now? The king's guards want you." I've not done anything," says Jack. "I've not done anything. I even gave the princess a wee present." "Oh." So the guard says, "Come with us." And he goes to the king, and he's presented to the king. And the king says, "You can stop shaking in your boots, Jack." He says, "I just want to ken where you got these singing leaves from." "I believe it was from a talking cuckoo." "Aye," said Jack. And the king says, "Well, do you think you'd be able to find that talking cuckoo? Because I want some of these leaves as well. My daughter will no share them. Don't know who she takes after. She doesn't take after me, I'm no selfish. But she'll no share these leaves with her mother and I, because she likes the singing too much. Do you think you'll be able to get me some? Go and find this talking cuckoo." Well, Jack had no clue where to find the talking cuckoo. He says, "Somewhere abroad." So he took ships here, there, and everywhere. And of course, there was no sign of the talking cuckoo. And he was getting fair despondent. He says, "I'll never find this talking cuckoo. I'm away home. I'll just have to give up." And hope the king gives up as well. But he'd no sooner got in the house, and he heard the wee tappet on the window. It was a wee cuckoo. And the cuckoo says, "I heard you were looking for me, Jack." "Oh, aye," says Jack. And he told of how the king wanted some more leaves. "Aye, that's no problem. I've got a tree back where I live, and it's full of singing leaves, just full of them. And you know I'm enchanted, don't you? And I can bring these back, no bother. But I need you to do something for me." And Jack says, "Aye, what's that?" "I want you to take me to the princess." And Jack says, "Aye, I can do that." And he says, "And I need the princess to shed a tear." Jack says, "How's you going to do that then?" And the wee cuckoo says, "Leave that to me. I'm great with the birds. Fabulous. I can get that sorted." So the cuckoo goes off, comes back to Jack with more singing leaves, and Jack goes to the king's palace, gets presented to the king, and gives him the singing leaves. And the princess says, "I'm fair taken on with that wee cuckoo that's curried up into your shoulder. Can I see him?" And Jack says, "Aye." And the princess is stroking the wee cuckoo's head, and she says, "Oh, He's a lovely wee cuckoo. Oh, it fair breaks my heart that he's been enchanted. Oh, a story like that would make you greet, and before you knew it, she's stroking the cuckoo and the tears stream down her face. One bounces on the head of the wee cuckoo, and that's just exactly what he wanted. And he turned into the most incredibly handsome prince. And as all good fairy tales go, she instantly fell in love with him. They got married and they lived happily ever after. And Jack was well recompensed, and he didn't have to worry about working on the farm anymore because he had plenty of money after that. And it fair got his brothers off his back as well. They stopped moaning about him being lazy after that. So that was the end of the story. Happy ever after for everybody.
Thank you so much, Elaine. Brilliant. I love a good Jack story. Fabulous. Great. Thank you. And we're going to move on to another regular. Sophia is going to tell us a story. Thank you, from Scotland.
Hello, everyone. It's nice to see everyone's faces. I'm sure we have all experienced butterflies in our tummy at times. And I'm going to take us to Central Highlands of Mexico. Now, there was a little boy who was trying to be a good brother. And he was quite mean to his sisters. He was quite mean to the local children. He did try. He tried to help old people with their shopping, but then he would eat all their sweets. And he would try to play games with the local children, but his impish ways got the better of him, and he would stick out his foot and watch them fall and laugh. He thought it was hilarious. But he was jealous that other people were experiencing butterflies weaving around them. It was a real local tradition for butterflies to meet the locals, and everyone had this experience, not this little boy. So family say, you know, son, your light is tarnished. For you to experience butterflies, your light needs to be good. And he's like, do you know what? I don't care. I like being different. I like being me. So the weather has changed. It's got cooler, like today. It's got windier, and so windy that the old and the young fall from off their feet and bang, they go onto the floor. And this happened to a little girl right outside his local shop. Now, usually he would just leave it to other people to see if this little girl was fine. But he suddenly felt a surge of butterflies in his tummy whizzing. And he popped out his hands and helped up the little girl. And her knee was bleeding. And he suddenly cared. And he took her home and dressed her knee. And she was crying. And it made him nervous. Sad for her. So he said, okay, I know what I'll do. And he goes off to the kitchen and he soaps up his hands. And he blows big, shiny, iridescent bubbles. And she giggles. And in response, he giggles too. And there's a lot of laughter and lights up that room. So eventually she's feeling better and she waves goodbye to the little boy. And as he waves goodbye to her, those butterflies are glowing again inside. And he has no idea what's happening. Of course, we all know the little boy is falling in love. So a few weeks go by, and this warm butterfly feeling inside his tummy continues. And He's helping old people with their shopping and not eating their sweets. He is buying children sweets. He is being joined in their games. He is feeling a complete difference, and so of his family. Now, here comes a tradition in Mexico, the Day of the Dead. It's very important in Mexico, for this is the night where lost loved ones are roaming around looking for their family to pass on guidance and love, where they can reconnect. And on the Day of the Dead, there is a wonder in Mexico. The monarch butterfly. The monarch butterfly is bright orange with black patterns. And they migrate from America and Canada to Mexico. And they fly in on the fir needles, on these big fir trees. And they huddle together because it's cold. And they land on the runway onto these needles. And the air vibrates with their wings. And there's so many, it sounds like an orchestra. So the community's gathered round these trees, just like we have a fire in the middle. But this is the orangey fire of the butterfly wings. Hear the crackling. A little boy looks over and he sees the girl. They recognize each other and they wave. And that glow comes back. And in that moment, an orangey butterfly weaves on through his fingers, the back of his neck, onto his nose. Now, an interesting fact of the butterfly is that they are attracted to the highest light source, highest vibration. And this is where they feel comfortable. So the little boy was illuminating. His authentic self was glowing. He was happy. He was becoming a good boy. So I'm sure we've all had our experiences having butterflies come in and out of our path. And that's because we are shining kindness. We are doing our best to be the best version of ourselves. And I'll leave it at that.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Sophia. It's always a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, thank you.
Fabulous. And I believe, just double checking my list, yes, we're going to pass over to Liz, who's going to read us one more of her poems to close the evening. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my cursor was top right and the unmute is bottom left, so sorry for the delay. Yes, we've been talking about the time of the year and the balance and the problems that we have in our ecosystems and all that sort of thing, all in the forefront of the news at the moment. This poem is called Gaia, and Gaia is the earth goddess, the entity that is the earth. And I believe that the earth will save itself even if we go. So when they talk about saving the planet, I think, no, not really. It's saving us. Earth will save itself. This is based on the philosophies of the First Nations people of the Americas. So this is Gaia. Mother Earth, deep beauty, verdant and aqueous, floats in inky nothingness, woken from sleep by stirrings, the dawn of life perfectly balanced. Sky Father enraptured protects and enfolds in all-encompassing arms, his strength and love safeguarding. Brother Wind breathes softly to warm or cool. She sighs and smiles, embracing the harmony. Then, human beings, inhuman doings, ripping, slashing, burning, taking and more taking, leaving her molested and degraded, aura poisoned, veins polluted, and open sinkhole scars on her lovely face. In her fevered anguish, she shakes and shudders. Brother Wind roars revenge, tearing up trees and hurling hail, ripping roofs from mortals' dwellings and tossing them round like toys. Sky Father flashes his fury across the sky, grumbles loud and long, and drenches his beloved with relentless tears, a liquid balm to heal and soothe. Puny humans run for cover, ignorant of their misdeeds, oblivious to the message. Earth sleeps to recovery beneath the watery blanket, and Grandmother Spider reweaves the web of life. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liz. Yeah, I often think about that.
Mhm.
And how we are just a scab that will be
Mhm.
taken
Yeah.
off.
There was an interesting book called Gaia by Professor James Lovelock, who, yeah, Lisa's nodding, yeah, who puts out examples of how the Earth rebalances itself. It's very interesting if anyone wants to read it. Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Liz. Thank you, and thanks again for sharing with us. It's lovely to have you, as always, Liz. And thank you everybody who's shared this evening. It's just been a really, really beautiful end to this cycle. It's just been wonderful, and and I'm hugely grateful to all of you for your contributions and your generosity and your presence. And so with that, we will close the evening and close the Celtic year. Thank you so much.